California is home to a massive farm economy and, of course, Silicon Valley, positioning the state to be a natural leader in ag tech. But there's a lot more to the story of what's going on in ag innovation in the Golden State today.
The University of California Agriculture and Natural Resources is dedicated and mandated to support agriculture in California, and you can't do that if you're not supporting innovation and technology.
While I was in California this fall for the FIRA-USA event, something caught my attention. Multiple efforts to more closely connect entrepreneurs, researchers, technical talent, investors, and most importantly, farmers to try to address ag tech innovation in the state.
I think there is this recognition that actually we do need to start thinking about a more diverse capital stack to finance solutions that enable California agriculture to thrive.
Today, you'll hear from 3 different people involved in some of these efforts to build a system that empowers innovation in ag tech for years to come.
So we spoke to over 50 companies and started to understand a little bit more about how do they develop products. And we learned in the process of doing this that there isn't a single startup incubator that combines a robotics shop, a makerspace, with a farm.
Building an ag tech ecosystem, for lack of a better word, on today's Future of Agriculture podcast. Hello, fellow ag nerd. Thanks so much for joining me for another episode of the Future of Agriculture. My name is Tim Hamrich, and every week you and I get to hear from the founders, farmers, innovators, and investors, and in today's case, enablers that are shaping the future of the ag industry. Got a cool episode for you here today. But before we dive into that, I also have a cool new presenting sponsor for this quarter that I'd like to recognize. As most of you know, I am fascinated by the way technology and innovation are shaping the future of agriculture. And that's why I'm really excited to partner with Case IH. Case IH designs, engineers, and produces cutting-edge farm equipment based on a comprehensive understanding of farmers' needs, wants, and challenges, integrating these insights into their development and manufacturing. For example, take their model year 25 Magnum tractor. The new Magnum is purposefully designed to answer farmers' needs in every design and engineering choice. Improved horsepower for pulling heavier loads faster. Bundled, integrated, and ready-to-go precision tech for greater accuracy in the field, and a transmission farmers can tweak for improved control and performance in different tasks. That kind of design thinking is exactly where the future of ag is headed, and that's why you'll be hearing me talk to the folks at Case IH at different points throughout this quarter about what they do and how they're working to push ag forward. Thanks again to Case IH for their leadership in ag innovation and for supporting the Future of Agriculture podcast. All right, back to today's episode with some exciting things happening in California and the positive impact all of this is having on ag tech in general. Today, you're going to hear from 3 different people: Hannah Johnson, Connie Bowen, and Danny Bernstein. I'm going to give you more detailed introductions to each of them as we go along here, but just so you know, Hannah is the industry lead for The Vine at the University of California Ag and Natural Resources. Connie is the founding general partner at Farmhand Ventures, who also works with The Vine. Danny is CEO and managing partner at Reservoir, which includes Reservoir Ventures, a venture capital firm, and Reservoir Farms Labs, which are nonprofit incubators that he's going to be talking about today. Some background here on how this episode came about. I attended FIRA-USA this past October to try to better understand what's happening in ag robotics and automation. You heard me do an episode in November about my takeaways from that event. What I didn't expect to see was some really fascinating and exciting public-private nonprofit partnership efforts that I think fill some real needs in agriculture innovation. So as luck would have it, that's what happened when I was there. So I wanted to put this episode together to try to highlight some of these efforts. And it's a lot. It's a lot to try to get my arms around, and I hope it doesn't get to be too confusing as we go through various groups and acronyms today. But I encourage you to stick around to the end of the episode because it not only highlights some of the gaps that are happening right now in ag tech, but also some of the really cool efforts to try to fill those gaps. I think this type of work is truly critical. I mean, running a farm or doing industry-leading research or growing a startup, all of these things are all-consuming tasks. They're more than all-consuming tasks. It really is important to try to build this sort of connective tissue, this infrastructure, whatever analogy you want to use, to empower and fully enable new and lasting innovations in ag tech. So first, I do need to admit my bias here. I grew up in California. I went to UC Davis. In college, I worked for an extension forward specialist. I'm really passionate about all these things. And although I don't live there anymore, I'm incredibly partial to California agriculture. But aside from that bias, just to state the facts here, the state produces more than 400 different ag commodities and is a leader in the nation in, I think, most fruits, vegetables, nuts, and other crops. About 8.5 million acres in California is used for irrigated crops, and exports from the state total over $20 billion every year. So the takeaway from that is California is a huge agricultural producer and economic powerhouse. If you thought of it just as, LA and San Francisco, you're truly missing out on the gem that is California agriculture. But like anywhere, it's not without its challenges. In most conversations with California growers, you're going to hear three things probably surface, and that is labor challenges, water challenges, and regulation challenges. Fortunately, though, California is also home to leading agricultural researchers and technologists who've been working on various aspects of these types of challenges and others for years. But there's still work to be done to make sure that technology is developed to actually be implemented on the farm and solve real problems. And that's where extension has been critical for over 100 years. In California, the statewide extension is a part of the University of California Agriculture and Natural Resources, UCA&R. You'll hear us use that acronym throughout today's episode, and just kind of think of it as California's version of extension. It's quite a bit more nuanced than that, but that's a good starting point. Also in California, they call their extension agents farm advisors. That terminology comes up in today's episode, so when you hear farm advisor, just know that's basically extension agent. So to try to support ag entrepreneurs and commercialize ideas, UCA&R helped to create something called The Vine in 2015. The idea was to connect these entrepreneurs to the wealth of ag expertise in cooperative extension and in research and at extension centers throughout California. You'll hear those research and extension centers called RECs in today's episode. So let's dive in with the conversation I had with Hannah Johnson in person at FIRA-USA this past October. Again, Hannah is the industry lead at The Vine, which is that program from UCA&R. Hannah says her role is to understand what growers of all different ag commodities need and what they're looking for in terms of technology and innovation. No small task, right? But how she got into this role and why it's so personal to her has a lot to do with her own farming background.
So I grew up in agriculture. My sister and I took over our operation in 2009 in Layton, super small town south of Fresno, and 80 acres, flood irrigated alfalfa. And obviously that wasn't paying the bills, and we learned everything the hard way, and all of our equipment didn't work, and we had no plans for the future, and we were just bootstrapping it. And then we sold. We were young and made that decision, and I think about it every day. It's like, this is not the move. I wish somebody stepped in. I wish I had a mentor. I wish I just knew there are other options out there. But yeah, like I think about that all the time, and that we are part of the statistic that the state's lost 7,300 farms since 2017. And a lot of that is just like, we just didn't have the tools. And like all of this technology and all of these new commodities and different ways of growing and different practices, they were just not super accessible to the everyday grower, especially to young women. So that's kind of my background. And then I spent kind of alongside that 20 years in philanthropy, and went out on my own a few years ago, and just like really my job and what I do for clients like UC Ag and Natural Resources is to connect people. Because what I have found in so many situations is that like most people want the same thing kind of, and they just maybe say it differently or have some preconceived notions that are obstacles. And so, yeah, I just bring people together. And so that's what I do in the technology space. I bring startups alongside growers and figure out how maybe it's not a sale that's going to end the conversation, but maybe there's some feedback that'll make the product better and we can iterate. Maybe they're looking for a researcher to provide additional data that they don't have. I kind of just fill in the blanks.
Yeah. And is that why Vine was created?
So Vine was created because the University of California Agriculture and Natural Resources is dedicated and mandated to support agriculture in California. And you can't do that if you're not supporting innovation and technology. And so like the last chunk of years, we really have been asking all the stakeholders involved, like, what do you need to do things more efficiently? Growers, what do you need to do things quicker, to do things better, to do things cheaper, to keep your margins? Startups, what do you need to produce? Like, how are you prototyping? How much does that cost? Once you have something online, like, how are you field trialing? Is there a workforce for this? What do you need to train your workforce? Like, what are all the connecting points? Where are the community colleges at? Where are these certificate programs at? And we just have been asking a lot of questions. And in doing that, we've, along the way, filled in gaps for people and relied on our strength, which is just our sheer staff and the amount of experts we have across the state that are devoted to agriculture. So, like, relied on them to help fill in gaps. And then we realized that, like, our role, and I'll get into our specific programmatic way we kind of support this effort, but like, we built out our specific program and we're launching it. And in doing that, and in all the conversations we've had the last few years, we realized, like, there's a lot of people moving in this direction. And we got to wrap our arms around it and kind of build a hub and a net of people interested in this work that want to be moving in the same direction.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And so were you like early in terms of staff with the Vine?
No, actually late. I've been with the Vine now for a year.
All right. And what is your charge?
Yep. So we have two specific programs, Connect and Build. And Connect focuses on like a field trial readiness for startups that are probably already operational. They maybe don't have a lot of tech on the market, but like they can do a trial. We run them through a curriculum to really get good at being in front of growers, to do a high level vetting of their tech. And then we provide access to grant funding to do additional trials. So we're building an access to market for them, essentially. And then we have our Build program, which takes research and commercializes it into a company. And this is research that we already know can be a viable company, that is a solution that growers are looking for. It's a very long process, obviously, because a lot of times, like, this is an amazing scientist or engineer or something else, but it's not a CEO. And so we have to start there.
So you find a CEO?
We find anything that they need to get them invested. And investment is our kind of our end game there. That all starts, and where my role comes in, with our industry advisory board. So we have an industry advisory board that's representative of 10 of the top producing commodities grown in California, 10 of the most productive counties in California, and 8 of the commodities that are only grown in California domestically, as well as 3 entities that represent various aspects of workforce.
Oh, wow. That sounds like a big group. How big is this group?
15.
Okay. Oh.
A lot of people check a lot of boxes. It's a dynamic group, and really proud of that work. They drive the conversation. So they identify and prioritize the issues facing agriculture. And then they tell both sides of our 2 programs, Connect and Build, what are the issues that we need to go after. So we know that this is the issue, so we need to go find solutions to do our field trial readiness that attack that issue. We know this is the issue we're focused on, so we need to go find research that could be a solution for that issue, and we build it into a company.
Right. And it seems like it's based on the thesis that the bottleneck has been in commercialization, whether that's commercialization of new ideas or existing ideas.
Exactly that. And also there's a lack of access and connection between growers and startups very early on. And we're trying to solve for that. We're trying to solve for access to field trials and demos and vetting early on. And then access to funding and mentorship and connection and like that real hand holding that needs to happen when you're translating research into a company.
Programmatically, like, what's that look like today?
Yeah. So today we have chosen labor as an issue because low-hanging fruit, duh. It's the first thing anybody will say. They're going to say labor, water, regulation. We get it. There are a lot of solutions related to labor, and there's a lot more coming online. So we felt like our first thing is to choose labor, to run a Connect curriculum, which we're doing now with 5 companies, and then to do a demo day at the Kearney Rec, where we will run these 5 companies through a demo and then go through a grant process for one of the companies and maybe a grower that attends that wants to do additional trialing. And these companies are early.
Yeah. Have you announced who the companies are?
Yeah. Bonsai Robotics, Amos, also here. Shout out to both of them. They're great. Gather, they're not here, but they're also great. Rapid Aim and Exata.
It's the only one I haven't heard of.
Google them. They're great. It's a drone.
And so they have already gone through the curriculum.
They're in the process of that now.
Okay. One exciting thing about what you're doing is I could see the opportunity to tie in, you got farm advisors all over the state that are seeing and doing interesting things that, as someone who tells stories for a living, I wish I could just focus on sharing because they're really cool people. How are you able to
They are
loop them in?
such cool people.
They are.
And anybody is that passionate about the work and just in it, and they're not doing it to make money. This is not a get rich job. This is I want somebody to keep farming job, and my role is to fill in the blanks and do that. I was talking to a farm advisor yesterday who's from Yolo County, and she just did the first Agtech field trial with 3 different tomato transplanters. Shout out to Priscilla. And she cares so much about what she's doing that she was running these trials because she wanted the data to be perfect. She was setting up the trials at 4:30 in the morning and then running she's not getting paid to do that. That is heart and soul, this work. We're so lucky to be connected to those folks. And just the state is so lucky to have them involved and care so much. So just really want to be blunt about that. We want all field advisors and all farm advisors and specialists to help do these demo days and to help do these field trials. And so we are using preference to do them at rec farms. We have 9 in the state. We're starting with Kearney. We're going to be doing a road show. And the whole goal is to make sure the door to industry is very open and to support our advisors in all of those counties.
That's really cool. Yeah, it seems like I really see, first of all those farm advisors have the heart of a teacher, which is great. But also
that is the best way to say it.
Don't they? Right?
Yes.
But I also could see if I were in this situation, I'd be like, look, I do everything I can to try to help. But at some point, I would love to play a part in actually taking it the final yard, right? Across the goal line. It seems like Vine maybe gives them more of a chance to do that or to see it pushed through a different way.
Not only that, but we're envisioning that once this model is up and running on the build side and we're really proof of concept, which we are there, our farm advisors and specialists are going to be the people that have these ideas and are doing this research. We're not just going to all the universities, although they are great partners. Our people that are in the field and know the application behind it and they're just boots on the ground, they've got the hacks. They've got the numbers. They've got the data. They know there are some low-hanging fruit ideas that we just need to open the doors to that. And we're really envisioning that as another value that we have.
Yeah. Kind of zooming out more generally as you kind of think about how all of this contributes to kind of a better sort of ag tech, ag innovation type. I don't like using the ecosystem, but I don't know a better word.
I hate that word. I'm so glad you said that.
Yeah.
When we first started talking, I was like, oh, this guy said ecosystem.
Can't talk to this guy. What would you call it?
I don't know. There's nothing to call it that makes you sound cool.
No, I don't know.
No.
Anyway, as you think about that, where do you hope this leads?
Yeah. So I really think that our role to play is to break down doors and make sure it's not a competitive environment and open the room to whoever wants to play in this space. And I think that's our role. And also our role, because we have eyes on the whole state, is to start plugging people in to where everybody can work together and finding what those obvious pipelines are for different programs. And our role is to connect. We're just in a unique spot to do it.
Right. So arriving here, I've had a wonderful experience at FIRA. I don't mean this as a criticism, but there hasn't been anything here that I'm like, I never even considered that might be possible. Now that's a really high bar. You can't show up expecting someone to, change your life everywhere you go. But at the same time, it causes me to ask the question, do you really find enough innovative ideas out there that need this support?
Yes. Let me touch on the FIRA thing first. I think that, I don't know if you've gone in any of the pitch sessions.
I have not.
Okay.
I saw 2 pitches.
Okay. Yeah. So most of what's demoed and most of what is out here you've seen, because now ag tech is starting to be a thing and there's eyes on it. And as we said, it's all over podcasts and people think it's cool and they want to know the latest and greatest and they go to the ag show in February and to see what's new. So a lot of that people have seen and they have questions about it and you've heard about. The pitch sessions, I'd say well, most of that's relatively cool and new and you haven't heard about it and whatever. Also the poster sessions. We didn't do a good job with placement this year, so they are not as highlighted as they should be, but the poster sessions are pretty cool. Are there enough good ideas out there to build into companies? Yes. And if you have one, could you please post my email? Yes, there are. There are. And so many of them are farm worker led and farmer led that we really are trying to focus eyes there. Like, how do we build that pipeline so that like everybody knows where to go when they have it, and we're going to help you and we're going to keep your IP and protect you. And this is your idea and your business and all of that. We're working on that. But a lot of like, there's a lot there. And then there's a lot that are like, there's a lot at the UC, there's a lot at UCA&R. We just need to open the door and like make people understand that we are here to help. And also, I just think there's a lot that are whispered about at coffee shops. And there's like a lot in small towns. And there's a lot in the middle of the field that somebody says, I have this really good idea. And we have to start putting ourselves in those conversations and making sure that people know and proof of concept, like sharing our wins once they happen. And we are game for all of that.
One thing Hannah also mentioned that didn't make the final episode just due to time is that they're building an AI tool to reinforce what that advisory board is coming up with and identify and prioritize issues in farming and then matchmake those issues with potential solutions that are available on the market. I think that is a pretty interesting approach and could have broader application beyond just the vine. So stay tuned for that one in the next year or so. I think they're trying to roll that out. I love this focus on advancing good ideas no matter where they come from. This concept combined with the focus on labor, I'm sure, is part of what got Connie Bowen involved. Connie is the founding general partner at Farmhand Ventures, an impact investment firm building and backing companies, enabling a better future of work in agriculture. In addition to her investing with Farmhand Ventures, Connie has also been working closely with Hannah and the Vine and other stakeholders in California agriculture. You've heard from Connie before on this podcast, including just recently on episode 442 about climate, people, and agriculture, where in this same conversation that you're about to hear, we went off topic into climate, and I used it for that episode as well. Before I cut to this conversation with Connie, though, one more program/acronym that you need to be aware of. UCA&R, which we already know, University of California Ag and Natural Resources, is also part of something called F3 Innovate, which received $65 million in grant funding to launch a state-of-the-art technology hub to serve and connect farmers across the San Joaquin Valley of California to industry. We could obviously go a lot deeper into what all that means and what they're doing with that money, but I'm trying my best not to overwhelm you here today, so we'll stay mostly focused on the Vine, but F3 does come up, so I thought I better mention it. Connie Bowen, a lot of you already know, perhaps from her work at the Yield Lab or with Ag Launch or now with Farmhand Ventures, but you might also know that she lives in St. Louis. So what's this St. Louis gal doing so involved in California? Well, that was my very first question.
I do a ton of work in California, kind of statewide, but particularly within the Central Valley. I've been working in partnership with the University of California, Ag and Natural Resources, aka UCA&R, aka statewide extension in California, for the past 2 years or so, because I don't think that there is a better partner in the world to connect solutions and commercialize solutions for growers of food in particular, which I have a preference for in kind of my investment thesis, than UCA&R. They are embedded within the entire state of California, both physically on the ground in rural counties, and most importantly, probably through their relationships within each extension experiment station. And California, I think everyone knows, is kind of 10% of US ag, 10% plus of US ag export value. It's 85% plus of specialty crops, so fruit, veg, nuts. As someone who invests in really solving the labor crisis, that labor crisis is most acute in specialty crops. And so I think we will see the earliest adoption of what I call next-gen ag equipment and solutions in the specialty crop space. It's also a really difficult space for venture capital to fit into, and I can get more into that. But California is a really interesting, obvious spot for me to start and focus a lot of Farmhand's focus. And the Central Valley in particular is very interesting as a area. I very much believe in the power of economic development via entrepreneurship. And I think there's a really interesting opportunity to enable some degree of socioeconomic mobility for farm worker and farm worker families. When you look at the population of Central Valley, it is vast majority Hispanic. And there are lots of connective tissues, whether that's active day farm workers or it is former, second degree type connections. I think that there's a really interesting opportunity to build a different type of Agtech entrepreneurial ecosystem, to use the buzzwords, than I have seen anywhere else.
Yeah, and so talk more about that. You said that's kind of the area where you are kind of focusing and helping. So what's your role in all this?
Yeah, well, and again, I am not part of F3. I am friends with the folks of F3. I've done a little bit of work with UC Merced on kind of creating a framework for inclusive innovation, again, meaning farm worker and farmer inclusive innovation in Agtech, published a white paper there. And then UCA&R is a member of the F3 group, and I work with UCA&R today. But UCA&R is not new, has been around for forever. And, again, statewide extension, so affiliated and tied to all of the UCs and Cal States, and then all of the experiment stations throughout the state on the A&R side. A&R has for a long time observed that through its relationships with ag industry groups, that while there's some really phenomenal research happening in the context of A&R and the UC system, that research kind of gets published and then doesn't really solve problems for growers. There's a commercialization problem, right? And the tech transfer problem in ag, I think gets talked about a lot. I don't think it gets solutioned on quite as often. And so we at Farmhand Ventures have worked with the Office of Innovation at UCA&R to iterate and refine some programs under the VINE, which is the current initiative of UCA&R Office of Innovation. Bear with me on all the kind of academic acronym stuff here. What matters more than the branding is what we're actually doing, I think. And so what we are doing is we have kind of two core programs, Build and Connect. Build is effectively a venture studio that my team at Farmhand Ventures runs in partnership with the team at the Vine. And we focus on working with researchers, PIs, postdocs, applied researchers to help them to move their research product invention into maybe a commercializable product, if that makes sense. And we have kind of a process through that. There are a bunch of different stages where we say, okay, it doesn't make sense to keep moving on this. We run experiments. You might end up flipping back a stage because V1 didn't make sense. But through that process, we've already launched some companies. So that's the Build side of the show. And the one other thing I'd mention about Build that is different, I think, than we're trying to make different from your average venture studio is we're not exclusively focused on building venture-backable companies. And that's really important in the context of agriculture because not all of the solutions that we need to be commercialized are going to be venture-backable companies or should pretend to try to be venture-backable companies. But then the other piece of the program that we have is Connect. And through Connect, we connect technical solutions with growers. So Build is focused on building new companies. Connect is focused on working with existing companies. So what we do through Connect is a couple different things. We vet startup companies. Well, we recruit startup companies based on, again, grower needs specific to the regions wherein we host demos. So we host demo days at extension or experiment stations throughout the state of California. Within these Connect events, we're recruiting competitively 5 or 6 companies for each demo day to demo to growers in that region. Basically, we're going to make the startups fishermen in this analogy, but I'm trying to bring these, or fisher people. I'm trying to bring the fisher people, invite them to come to this fully stocked pond that we are creating for them. And we're trying to tell them exactly who's there, exactly what's in the pond, exactly what tackle they might want to use, and they can talk about what their options are. And then it's up to them to hook them, right? Some of the companies will demo and not be successful, and that is the nature of a demo. Some of them won't find full product market fit, but we are working to try to make it easier for more frequent collisions between startup companies and farmers. And the next step of that is, and this is something we're continuing to work on, is we are trying also to provide funding for startup companies and farms in California to run initial field trials. Even if we can't completely offset that cost, if we can help to, and we're trying to do this non-dilutively, if we can start to offset that cost at least partially, I think I've seen this, and shout out to Ag Launch in Tennessee and TDA, who has really, I think, pioneered something like this. I think we can do a similar thing in California, and it can really help to grease the flywheel on more iteration happening on farms.
And so, okay, I think you just answered what was going to be our next question is like, on the build side, I could see your metric for success being like, how many successful companies can we kind of like build out of here? On the innovate side, is the metric of success like how many, field trials can we support? What are you looking for there as the North Star?
We are looking to conduct a high number of demo days, first and foremost. I mean, I think that these are, we just talked about this a little bit, right? We both just came from FIRA. FIRA is awesome. There aren't a lot of growers there. I am a big believer in bringing technology to growers because I don't know if you've heard, but farming is like kind of a full-time plus job. And so we are hearing that it is much easier and more interesting. And this is why we have targeted, this is a morning. It's just a morning. It's not a whole overwhelming giant trade show. You can come look at the 3 companies that are relevant to your crops in your region at your extension station where you know some people. And I think, again, like that collision element is actually an important metric. But yeah, eventually the outcome should be, and that we'll be tracking, more field trials and eventually more sales of technology and faster adoption by farms in our regions that we are conducting these demo days.
How do you describe what's happening in California to somebody who's in ag tech but not in California?
I guess the way that I generally do, I'm sorry, I'm going to do a thing where I dodge the question a little bit. The ag tech ecosystem, like you've kind of got like this, the like Silicon Valley pocket, and we've always had the Silicon Valley funded kind of ag tech things, but like that's almost like its own little world that is like tends not to be as connected to agriculture as you would think it should be, because it's actually not that far away. That's the thing. Like there is this opportunity for Bay Area folks to be commuting down to the Central Valley with some regularity, but you don't see that as much as I feel like you would hope. And so the pro and con of that is like, okay, we've got obviously a ton of venture funding in California, but almost none of it, and I'm sure Danny gave you better stats than me on this, almost none of it is allocated outside of cities, big cities. And also, I've talked a ton about how venture capital is sometimes a fit, often not a fit, often kind of detrimental, I think, for agricultural solutions, particularly venture capital that is deployed by folks who don't understand ag. And so there's a pro and con there in terms of how Silicon Valley culture influences Californian ag tech culture. But I think that ultimately within F3 and within all these different kind of groups, and I'm sorry for whoever I forgot to mention, that are active in Central Valley, I think there is this recognition that actually we do need to start thinking about a more diverse capital stack to finance solutions that enable California agriculture to thrive. Because we are in an environment right now where exports are declining. And that is not the direction that the state of California or the United States wants things to be going. And so there is this, okay, how are we gonna private-public partnership, philanthropy partnership to start to solve some of these really big intractable problems? And I think there's an appetite to do that in the Central Valley kind of Californian ecosystem right now. but it's early days.
It is definitely early days, and there is a lot of interest and energy behind these ideas in California. At FIRA-USA, there was a big announcement unveiling Reservoir Farms, the first ever on-farm robotics incubator, which is set to open in 2 different locations in Central and Salinas Valleys in early 2025. When here we are, 2025. I had a chance to catch up with Danny Bernstein, CEO of Reservoir at FIRA, to talk about this announcement and his efforts to lead a coalition trying to bring more innovation to rural areas. The Reservoir includes both Reservoir Farms, which are these incubators, and Reservoir Ventures, an early-stage venture capital firm focused on rural innovation and the future of California and the American West. Danny has a background in big tech, both with Google and with Microsoft, but he turned his attention to ag and natural resources in recent years. He envisions rural hubs for robotics in the short term, but also other digital and bio-based companies in the future. All of this is part of his mission to bring investment and innovation to rural areas of California.
We basically see an inverse of where venture capital is invested versus where the critical environmental and industrial imperatives are. Less than 1% of California's venture capital goes to Central California, for example. If you remove Santa Barbara and Santa Cruz, it's 0.24%. Another way to look at the problem is if you look at a map of California's startup incubators and startup accelerators, and then you look at where our natural resources are and where we have a lot of critical environmental imperatives, there's another inversion. And so there isn't, for example, a startup incubator focused on wildfire prevention. And that's an example of the kind of thing where we look at it and say, there's a problem here. So it happened for us that we decided to focus first on imperatives with specialty crops and micronutrient supply, and seeing more and more of our farmland and more of our food supply being imported and losing more and more of our farmland. And we developed a handful of strategic relationships that began to inform our strategy. One was with Western Growers Association, and worked very closely with people like Walt Duflock and Ben Pallone over there. And then we also developed a partnership with University of California Ag and Natural Resources, UCANR, and developed a thesis around how could we really spin the flywheel faster in innovation and specialty crops, specifically focused on automation and mechanization. So we spoke to over 50 companies and started to understand a little bit more about how do they develop products, what are some of the challenges. And we learned in the process of doing this that there isn't a single startup incubator that combines a robotics shop, a makerspace, with a farm. There are over 7,000 startup incubators around the world, and none of them combine those 2 very basic things. There are shops next to farms, but there aren't 12, let's say, pods of shops, next to each other. There aren't, mentorship access, customer access, investor access, sort of infrastructure, and then certainly not adjacent to a working farm. When you're at FIRA, you can see, for example, that there are test plots here where people can demonstrate their wares and sort of demonstrate their customer promises. And there's a gentleman named Ben Pallone who does all the planting for that over the course of a handful of months. And Ben has been working with us on this project. And what we've been talking about is that Reservoir Farms, which is the name of it, can be a 24/7, 365 FIRA, which is why only have that level of transparency 1 or 2 days out of the year. Why not make that more of how Agtech innovation happens? And as an investor, I saw a lot of inefficiency in how capital is deployed, because if you're basically paying a startup to, run around with their machine in a truck and drive 5 hours to do one demo, drive 3 hours to do one test, there's just a huge amount of inefficiency. And so that's what we're up to.
Makes sense. And so would this be an incubator in that an early stage startup would apply to be a part of this? And what does that look like programmatically?
Yeah, programmatically, we're launching 2 facilities in Q1 of 2025. So we'll cut ribbons in Q1. One will be in Salinas Valley, and the other will be in Merced. And we chose those locations very deliberately. They're 2 hours apart from each other. And there's also a very, very different crop set between the 2 of them. One's leafy greens and berries, and the other's really kind of like everything else in specialty crops, permanent crops, things like that, orchards. And the way to work is that we will have, at any given moment, a dozen or so startups in residence, and they will actually pay like a membership fee basically to be there. And we won't exclude. If a startup wants to be there and they have a viable project and they can pay their rent, let's say, then we will accept them. We will also incubate certain projects ourselves, maybe with a grower, and do that in a kind of an efficient way. We'll do some studio work. And then we also see a very strong use case for international companies. So I spoke to one Istanbul-based startup today, and he said to me, can we have our U.S. headquarters be at Reservoir Farms because we're focused on specialty crops? I said, sure. It's going to be way more capital efficient for him to do that versus have to find his own shop, find his own farm, find his own storage, and all those things. And so we've come to call this the Olympic Village of Agtech because we think that there will be quite a few international companies that actually want to leverage this for infrastructure. And so the model is much more of an incubator than it is an accelerator.
And bring this all back around to the rural economy. You know, some people look at robots and say, boy, this is taking jobs away from our rural economies. You know, so how do you think about this actually contributing to the success of rural economies in Central California?
Yeah, there are a handful of things. I mean, we've been in touch with labor organizations since the very beginning here. And I asked them that question. And I said, how do you feel about this, essentially? And what I heard was technology happens and we have to adapt to technology. And so labor folks tell us they're just not in the business of technology rejection. At the same time, you also hear about stories of growers and sometimes farm workers sabotaging robots. Like you do hear those stories. So I think there are ways to bring people along. In the same way that growers can be resistant to change at times, farm workers can be resistant to change. So it's really a question of like, how are you holding a strategic dialogue, you know, as an organization? Are you building community around this? It's also why we've worked with community colleges since the very beginning on this project. So Hartnell and Salinas, which is an institution, and Merced College and Merced, they were on stage with us. And the idea is that we actually want to integrate workforce development, apprenticeships, internships, short course certifications, et cetera, because we all know that the ag worker is becoming an ag tech worker. And there's going to be a 30% increase in ag jobs globally in the next 5 years, which equates to millions of jobs. The growth will be in advanced equipment operation, big data, things like that. So what we basically have to do as a early stage innovation organization is think about how do we involve workforce early and how do we work with community-based organizations, labor organizations, farm worker organizations, things like that, and to kind of like really spread the message rather than doing this in a vacuum. So that's the approach we're taking. It's also part of our approach as a nonprofit. And so some of the, let's say, grants that we're pursuing those with community colleges, with community organizations.
Yeah. And so your venture capital work, is it focused on these same themes as well?
We're focused on innovation and natural resource markets. And so it happens that our first few focus areas are ag tech automation, mechanization for specialty crops, ag byproduct innovation for specialty crops, and then digitization. Those are the three primary focus areas. But ultimately, our interest as a firm is natural resources in general, both how do we sustain and maximize natural resources. So I mentioned fire prevention earlier. If we found an amazing fire prevention startup, we would invest in them. If we saw an amazing startup that was, reuse of ocean materials or things like underwater drones, like we would be interested in those sorts of things.
Yeah. Outside of venture capital, where else do you see the need for support when it comes to early stage innovation in rural areas?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of gaps, and I think we can do a better job of creating really robust entrepreneurship programs at our universities. Places like Cal Poly, UC Davis, UC Merced, they are good schools for entrepreneurship. Can they be great schools for entrepreneurship? UC Berkeley, for example, is considered to be a great school for entrepreneurship. Berkeley has over 20 accelerator incubators in Berkeley proper. And right now in other Central Valley communities, there might be one, there may be two, but you don't have that saturation, you don't have that competition for great entrepreneurs. So that's an opportunity. We think that will change. And so that's one area is more support on campus, kind of better tie-ins between entrepreneurship and universities. That's one. We also think there are areas around workforce development. And I think the two community colleges that we're working with are really on the front foot. Another example is Solano College, just right out here in Solano County. If you walk through Solano College, you feel like you're in a lab of the future. They have like over $40 or $50 million in lab equipment.
Oh, wow. That's changed a lot since last time I was there then.
Yeah. It's wild. I mean, a lot of that is, Genentech being there and things like that. So that school, you can get a full bachelor's degree in biomanufacturing, and that lab is super legit. So one part of it would be entrepreneurship. Another part of it would be workforce. We also have to find ways to meld like what we love about rural regions, the pastoral qualities, the traditions, the heritage, and things like that, with an eye toward the future. And so how do we preserve what we love about Salinas, but then help create a next generation workforce? And that is something that a lot of what Reservoir Farms has been is a really like a local story, and really having to get to know people, county supervisors, community leaders, people who run shelters, all those sorts of things, because there can be a change resistance factor. There have been times, of course, a place like Salinas Valley is a great example where that's for a very long time been a place of significant innovation in agriculture. But what What about when agriculture starts to look like robotics and significant mechanization? It just starts to look different. You have things flying around. And I think that working at a community level to make sure that we're continuing to embrace those innovations that make agriculture sustainable, that keep farmland in the West and all those things, that's going to take some time.
Well, there is so much more we could get into here about the various players in California doing this important work to really think strategically about ag innovation. But maybe we can revisit this topic on a future episode if it's something that you want to know more about. As always, I'm open to your feedback, good, bad, or otherwise. tim@aggrad.com, or find me on X or LinkedIn. Thank you very much to Hannah Johnson, to Connie Bowen, and to Danny Bernstein for taking the time to be on the show today. I'll leave links in the show notes where you can learn more about The Vine, Farmhand Ventures, and Reservoir. Thanks also to our quarterly presenting sponsor this quarter, Case IH. Go learn more about the latest and greatest from them at caseih.com. Last but never least, thank you for your time and your attention. I do not take it lightly. I'll be back next week with another story of ag innovation.